Hello, everyone. My name is Castle Williams, and my talk is entitled, What is Being Enhanced? An Examination of the Storm Prediction Center's Risk Category System Among Members of the Public. And I'm very excited to be the first talk of this session, which is all about the social science initiatives that are going on to evaluate the Storm Prediction Center's risk category system to see if there are ways that we can improve it among all different types of audiences. I would like to give a shout out to my research team on the left down there at the bottom, and on the right side, our operational partners at the Storm Prediction Center. For without them, this research would not be possible. So if you're not familiar with the Storm Prediction Center's risk category system, you can see it on this slide here. It progresses from marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate to high in those very colors. And so what I was really interested in doing was exploring the usability of this risk category system. And I did so through 3 separate studies. The first study was more qualitative in nature that involved in-person interviews and a card sorting task to explore the usability of the Convective Outlook graphic, as well as the risk category system. Then we moved on to 2 different studies that were more quantitative in nature, that kind of scaled up these in-person interviews through an online survey to first investigate the usability of the risk category system in study 2 among undergraduate students. And then finally in study 3, we moved up even further to members of the US public. But here, instead of investigating the usability, we were more interested in examining and ranking all risk words that may be used as kind of this risk category system. So we compared the current risk category words with possible new risk category words. And what we did was we borrowed from all across the weather enterprise to examine these. So we're going to start with study 1. And again, this was the qualitative study where we were really interested in the usability and getting that rich data, being able to sit down with someone and ask them about the risk category system. So we did a card sorting task, which essentially allowed me to lay some index cards out in front of people and have them arrange them. And then I would be able to understand and talk to them about how they arrange those. So you can see that on the screen here, there are multiple rows of these index cards, and these represent how people arrange the colors from least threatening to most threatening. And when we look at all these colors, it's kind of hard to pick out some patterns, but I'm going to pull out some really useful things for you. For the most part, most participants deviated from the color pattern used by the Storm Prediction Center. And you can see that at the top row there, how this individual put pink in between the green and the yellow. So this is what we really saw most often, was red being at the very high levels, pink being somewhere thrown in the middle. And so that was kind of the most deviation in terms of color. On the other hand, we saw yellow was less threatening than the green condition for 30% of the people. So again, that's 30% of the 30 people that we interviewed. And then also, again, like I mentioned, red was the most threatening color for 63% of that 30 people. And then magenta was less threatening overall for 66% of those threatening people. So those are the some of the major themes that jump out in terms of color when we evaluated color. But also we were able to ask and sit down with people what came to mind when they thought about these certain colors. Interestingly, green jumped out as safe or secure. So we saw this really quite often. Most people were unclear why the first risk category was green, because that indicated that they were safe. So they had some conflicting opinions about being both at risk, but that green conveyed that safe color. Yellow often conveyed sunshine to people. And this may be why, again, we see it being less threatening than the green condition among 30% of the sample. Orange didn't really have a particular color. The only thing that came up a few times was some people didn't know whether this color was orange or brown. Red indicated danger to people. Stay away, you're at the most danger. And I think that's really why red was perceived to be the most threatening color, with over 63% of the participants. And then lastly, I think because it's an artifact of asking people in the South, when people saw this magenta color, they immediately thought ice and snow, which is a concern that we often have in the South. And so it's pretty interesting to see that come out of these results. So we did the very same thing with the risk category words. And so again, you can see each row represents one individual that we interviewed, and I'll again pull out some interesting findings. So here, slight was less threatening than marginal, and we saw this 76% of the time among those 30 individuals. So instead of putting marginal first, which is the correct row at the top, there you can see the correct way that the Storm Prediction Center uses it, slight was less threatening. Almost all participants deviated from the word pattern used by the Storm Prediction Center. Only one individual that we interviewed out of the 30 got the words correct, the way that the Storm Prediction Center uses them now. And lastly, enhanced was more threatening than moderate. 83% of the time we saw individuals put the enhanced card ahead of moderate, with most people putting moderate in the dead center, which I think makes sense. Something's moderate goes in the middle. So those were some of the trends that we took away from that card sorting task. But we also were able to sit down with people and really ask them what they thought about the current system. And these were three of the biggest themes that arose. The first was with the word enhanced. And this is kind of where my talk title comes from. Someone asks, what is being enhanced? Are slight conditions, marginal conditions? Are the moderate conditions being enhanced? So it's interesting that one individual was able to pull out this word of enhanced is distinct from the other words, and that enhanced is being used as a descriptor to describe something, but people feel as though that something is missing. And it's interesting because enhanced originally was called enhanced slight, but the slight portion was dropped initially. So it's interesting to see that people are picking up on that. The next is there is a mismatch between colors and words. So for example, this individual says, I assign the color red with greater than moderate risk. To me, orange would be moderate. I'm having a hard time with the colors and the levels of intensity they're portraying. So as this individual said, they feel as though that red color doesn't match the risk level that moderate is conveying. And then lastly, some people said there may be just too many categories. Someone said the problem here is between marginal and enhanced, because in my mind, it should just be slight, moderate, and high. And to be honest, this individual had never even heard of the Convective Outlook or the SPC's risk category system. So they did not even know that it used to be slight, margin, moderate, and high, like just 3 categories. So it's interesting to hear that perspective from them. So moving to study 2, again, we're scaling up this usability analysis to a larger sample of people to see if we find similar trends among undergrad students. And actually we do. So when we show the SPC's word ranking, we can see that a majority of people pointed out that slight was the first risk category word, very similar to those interviews that we did. The second risk category word was kind of a toss-up, but marginal again took the lead here. The third risk category word, which again is the middle, people felt as though that should be moderate in the middle. Enhanced took the fourth risk category word spot, showing again that enhanced usually can be seen as a higher risk category word. And then lastly, high was very evidently the last risk category word that we saw. In terms of color, the patterns that we saw among the interviews did not show up as largely in the survey. So here, green, yellow, orange, red was pretty evident. When we get to the red, though, that's where it gets kind of, what should be that fourth color? Because we have both yellow, orange, red, and magenta kind of showing some signs of trying to dominate here. And then lastly, in that fifth risk category spot, we see red and magenta very close. So I think the biggest takeaway from here is that red is kind of really considered that most threatening color, but also that when we get to that fourth and fifth risk color level, that's where we're seeing the most the most challenges trying to distinguish between those different colors and what risk they convey. And this is where we have the most danger as well. So that can be really quite a challenge. In the survey, we also combined color and words to see if that would help people. And what we saw is that it really does. So here you can see that people really show that marginal with the green. They know that that comes first, slight in yellow, then enhanced in orange. Still showing some signs of that moderate being an issue there. The fourth risk category being moderate and the fifth risk category being high. So when we add colors and words together, it gets a little bit easier and more intuitive to use. So that leads us to study 3, which, if you will recall, is again an online survey with members of the public, but we wanted to examine and rank some of these commonly used words. And I should just caveat that this is very new data. We just got this, so very preliminary results to share with all of you at AMS. So don't take much from it. We'll be able to explore a little bit more of it once we get a little bit more into the new year. So here's the question that we asked people. Meteorologists use different phrases to describe the likelihood that extreme weather will hit within 25 miles of your area. When you see the following phrases, what % chance comes to mind? And we asked them various words, from very low to catastrophic. And we're really curious because we threw in some of the risk category language that the SPC currently uses, but we also borrowed some other risk category language that we see some broadcasters using, that we see other individuals within the government using, like USGS. We threw in considerable and catastrophic, like some of the tags that the Weather Service uses. So we tried to provide as many different options for people to evaluate. And what we see is that, again, the slight and marginal trend pops out. More people felt as though slight was a less threatening word or less likelihood word than marginal. But we see the same thing with moderate and enhanced. So again, moderate is more towards this middle, enhanced is higher. But interestingly, people didn't really put enhanced as high as we thought they would. The other interesting to take away from this is that there are these 3 kind of distinct segments of these risk category words. We see this from very low to marginal as kind of this 18 to 28 level. We see this medium to considerable, which is kind of this middle level. And then we see this high to extreme level. So kind of these 3 different tiers, which is interesting, and we're going to look more into it, but I just thought it would be worthy of noting. But I think it would be better if we could really visualize this. And so that's why I created this visualization that really helps us understand kind of the perceptions of extreme weather likelihood. And there are several things that I want to point out. And I think a lot of them are the very similar trends that we're seeing across all 3 studies, which is look at the spread of enhanced. Look how spread out people feel and have perceptions of it. That's a huge kind of distinction and range there. So I think that is kind of one of the challenges of using the word enhanced. We also see medium and moderate being really nicely split down the middle. So when we put moderate higher in the risk category system, it may cause challenges as well. The other interesting thing to point out is, again, this marginal and slight. We see a larger spread for marginal here, which makes me think that it is not as great of a word as we may want as well. So these provide us some options to consider and think about as we start moving forward with the Storm Prediction Center and providing and exploring new and alternatives that might replace potentially the risk category system in the future. So you may be asking, what are our next steps? So I told you this was preliminary data. So we're going to be running additional analyses to better understand, are there clusters that more clearly represent a break in the probability perception? Can these clusters provide information on which risk category words complement one another or might work well together with one another? In addition to probability and likelihood perception, we also asked these same words among perceived severity. So we're going to be exploring that a little bit more as well. And then the next study that we really want to end up doing is developing a risk category system prototypes to test and evaluate against the SPC's current risk category system among all end users. And so all is bolded and underlined and italicized here because we want to do general public, emergency managers, broadcast meteorologists, all types of decision makers. And so these are just some of the prototypes here at the bottom that we're considering using. Obviously, the current risk category system. A level 1 to a level 5, we're getting a lot of interest of this from broadcast meteorologists. We're considering changing the quote unquote problematic words, which from this research kind of signal both marginal and enhanced. And then we're also thinking about other prototypes that might emerge from the cluster analysis that we end up doing on some of that data. So just some major takeaways. Again, I think the biggest pattern that we pull out of this is that the SPC's risk category system was not intuitive to a majority of participants. And in fact, they really kind of pulled out this marginal and enhanced being those quote unquote problematic words. And we see that really emerge and become more generalizable as we start to increase the sample size, but also the sample population from undergrad students to a US sample of the public. And so therefore this third study provides us really great results and increases our generalizability of those patterns, but allows us to kind of think through some alternatives that we might test in the future. So I'll just leave it at that with this acknowledgments of the University of Georgia, the National Weather Service, and NOAA for their assistance in providing us grant funding for this, but also being able to work alongside them through all 3 of these studies has been very beneficial. And if you have any questions, please feel free to join us for the live Q&A on Tuesday, January 12th at 10:40 a.m. And you, of course, can always send questions ahead of time to castle.williams@noaa.gov or on Twitter @WXCastle. Thanks and have a great one.